It's the Motion Boom. It's a speaker that keeps on giving. What does it give? It gives deeper bass. The more you put up the sliders, the deeper that bass goes. It's an £80 speaker, £70, depends on the deal. And the thing about this speaker is, got amazing deep, genuine deep bass. What do I call genuine deep bass out? Well, 65 hertz and below, I'm calling that deep bass in speakers like this. If it was a subwoofer, we'd be talking lower. Speakers like this, genuine deep bass, where you start to get that rumble. 65 hertz and below, 40 hertz would be brilliant. We are getting a rolled off 40 hertz on the speaker. And the thing is, you keep saying to me now, that 150 hertz slider, you got it a bit low. We like to push it right up, especially JBL extremely priced 1 and 2 lovers with that upper bass. And in fact, as you can see, clue, going to be comparing it with the W King D8 and the W King D9. These are all cheapo budget boomboxes. So I have done the D9 against the D8. The D9 came out a bit louder, but didn't sound that great to my ears. Thing to note about the D9 is already been a firmware update. There's no app for these speakers, so you may never know there's a firmware update unless you actually go and research it. Well, if you go and research it, or if you contact W King themselves, they will send you the new firmware. I have updated the firmware. I'm not sure it's the best thing to do. In fact, I would probably suggest don't. However, bear in mind, on my comparisons, got the new firmware update. Got the only update I ever had on the W King. And custom settings, and that's what I'm talking about, custom settings, because you keep saying your 150 hertz out is a bit low. Now, 150 hertz slider on here is going to be where you're going to get your upper bass. And for me, one thing you keep saying to me is, we like the settings you had for the Motion Plus. When we put those settings on this speaker, it sounds pretty good. Well, my EQ is specific to the speaker that I have set it to. The thing about that, the Motion Plus, is lacks deep bass. So when you push up the 150 hertz slider, it's not really affecting anything below that. In fact, you're covering up, and that's what a lot of these cheap speakers do. They're upper bass heavy, even the Sony XB43, it covers up what is lacking in deep bass. It's cheaper, amplifier-wise, to go upper bass. The deeper the bass, the more of the amplifier you're going to need to use. We've got genuine, to me, amazingly deep bass for a speaker priced like this. And that means if I put the 150 hertz slider up, it's now competing with the deeper bass. Not only is it masking some of that deeper bass, it's now, to me, to my ears, a bit too much in that it's robbing me of some clarity. It's affecting my vocals. Now, obviously, we've all got different ears. So in this video, because it's a boombox comparison, and because you do want me to push the 150 hertz slider, we're about +2 now. Those are my new settings. You will see it on the clips, the actual custom settings I'm using. I do admit I've got this about -1 as my go-to settings. It does sound great with the 150 hertz slider up. There is terrific headroom. You can really push these sliders, not really getting too much in the way of distortion. It's getting a bit messy, but limiters apply in these speakers. You can get away with it. I'm saying I'm doing 150 hertz +2. It sounds good, but for me, it's robbing some clarity, affecting my vocals. For me, I'm bringing it down to about -1 or 0 in reality. So these three speakers, let's have a quick overview. They are all around £70, £80, depending on the deal you get. I'm telling you what it was this morning when I checked. I know you keep saying to me, oh, it wasn't that price when I checked. Hey, this is in the UK. This is sterling prices, around £70, £80. And they do flash deals all the time, Soundcore and W King. They are well known for that price fluctuating, even more than Bitcoin at times. So you can actually get them cheaper sometimes. People tell me they've got one of the W Kings for 45 quid. I've even in the past had the Motion Plus around that price. But it seems at the moment, for me, when I check, around £78 to £80. If you take the gamble and you hold on, may get cheaper. In terms of battery, 44 watt hours makes the D9. And by the way, that's a 60 watt speaker. So that's both on paper, that's the meaty speaker. It does have the meatiest battery, followed by, surprisingly, the Motion Boom, 37 watt hours. yet only rated 30 watts. Rated 50 watts, the W King D8 coming in at 30 watt hour on the battery. So obviously they've addressed that with the W King D9, but they don't sound the same. So it's not like, to me, I know D9 is one up from the D8, but it doesn't seem to me one is an upgrade to the other. We will get to that. They're all SBC codecs. They're all Bluetooth 5. You can use all of these as a stereo pair. They've all got USB-C connections. They've all got auxiliary inputs, except for, disappointingly, the Motion Boom have decided in the modern age to drop the auxiliary input. Can all be used as a power bank, can all be used as a phone except the W King D8, according to my specs. One thing you want to know, so I am going to tell you. Of these three speakers alone is the W King D9. You can actually play directly off a flash card, which you will stick in the slot at the back. And you can play your music directly off of that. It seems, surprisingly, a lot of you still think that is a great feature in terms of weight. The heaviest is, of course, the 60 watt, 2.7 kilos of the D9. The D8, just under 2.5 kilos at 2.4 kilos of the Motion Boom. Just a tiddly-widdly 1.5 kilos. Noticeably different in the hand when I pick up the Motion Boom on one of the W Kings. And of course, the giveaway is these two speakers are heavier, so should not be a shock. But I'm just saying that because it is a comparison. It is smaller and it is noticeably lighter in the hand. Only the Motion Boom is IPX7. Only the Motion Boom, therefore, can be dropped safely in a swimming pool up to 1 meter of water, but actually it floats, so it should be at the top. It's only IPX5 on the D8, and it's only IPX6, so kind of splash proof and like jet proof in terms of water, but do not submerge. Now, we've got tweeters in the 50 watt D8. We've got tweeters in the 60 watt D9, but we've got no tweeters, and that was a shock. Motion Plus was a favourite for a long time. This is now my new favourite. In terms of value for money, it's not the greatest speaker of all time, but I think it's one of the best in terms of value for money. But no tweeters, so it's bigger than the Motion Plus, about twice the size in actual fact to look at, but no tweeters. You can only dream of what that could have been. In terms of latency, you like watching YouTube and movies and all that. Neither of these three speakers I tested were any good, but of these three speakers, the W King D8, just about. And 100 milliseconds, well, that's for local files, but YouTube, 130 milliseconds. That's noticeable lip sync issues. In terms of apps, W King, whoever they really are, somewhere in China, don't waste their time bringing in people to program their apps. They don't have an app. As I said, if you want to do the firmware update, you've got to email them, excuse me, but is there a firmware update? And they will tell you you can have this or not. Of course, there is that great app. The Soundcore give you multiple sliders in the EQ. It gets embedded. You keep asking me, does it save it in the speaker? Yes. It's embedded. It's saved into the speaker, your EQ settings. And you can have multiple EQ settings. It's a very nice app. And it's the only one, not only with an app, but where you can set the EQ. That's the overview. 50% comparison. These three speakers, so-called budget boomboxes.
In the class and they can smell it from a mile, but I got away in time before the teacher could find out. Ringing with my neighbors, police chase us into town. Never took the easy route, but you could just look around. Wasted youth, late for school. Keep my shoes untied, it's cool. Break your stupid rules into it. If I get caught, I'll play the fool. Threw out my whole plate of food just to meet up with my crew. I said I'll be back at 10, but now it's 2:15. I made it out alive by the grace of God. Couple broken bones, couple scrapes and scars. Summer nights at midnight, looking at the stars. Like before I ever knew I'd make it this far. Family broke apart, I know it felt so hard. I remember running around in my front yard. It still feels like yesterday, but it's hard to keep the pace of that clock. I was up to mischief, now I'm glued on my phone. Looking out the window on a long ride home. I'm wondering to myself these days, where does all the time, where does wasted youth, late for school. Keep my shoes untied, it's cool. Break your stupid rules into it. If I get caught, I'll play the fool. Throw out my whole plan. just to meet up with my crew. I said I'll be back at 10, but now it's 2:15.
I'm the girl that likes to daydream and pretend, holding on to any good thing till it ends. Oh, made me realize I'm better off without you, 'cause I changed my mind, you're not what I want. I'm done chasing down the ones that seem to bore me. It's a waste of time, you'll get no response, 'cause I'm not the one. I know I'm not the right girl. I'm not the one. I wish it were a perfect world. I'd be the one. I'm moving on. I'm not taking any chances on you now. Just believe me when I say I'm not the one. I know I'm not the right girl. I'm not the one. I wish it were a perfect world. I'd be the one.
So for me, against the W King D8, I found the Motion Boom had the more satisfying bass at these moderate listening volumes. I found it to be clearer, and I found the W King D8 to be a little hard-edged, a little compressed sounding, stronger mids, but ultimately Boombox, it's about the bass. So we got upper bass, pop pop pop, and we got deep bass, boom boom boom. Now, as I said, and I will keep saying, a lot of you prefer that upper bass. It's going to be a matter of taste, but I think more people do prefer that lower deep bass. And in terms of if you want to actually listen to your tracks rather than just party, it's gonna give you you're gonna be able to peer into more of that track, because you're going to actually hear more the instruments and the lower frequencies where they will be pretty muted. I say pretty muted, but weirdly at 40 hertz there's a slight peak. There's this thing with the W King D8, it slopes off, but then there's they give it a little bit of a deep peak, so there is some 40 hertz there. But in terms of overall full round bass, it really is the Motion Boom. In terms of against the W King D9, well, pretty much, I said found it the tuning a bit strange in my first video. Both the videos I've done so far with the D9 with the new firmware update, they've actually sat down and said, this sounds better than the firmware we had before. So I don't really know, other than it's filled out some bass. You've got a bit more bass, but to me that sounds hollow and echoey. It has a very non-musical nature to it. Yes, it's got a thump, and that may be for a lot of you all you want, but this is far more musical. The Soundcore, these are both boomboxes, cheap things that will go quite loud and produce some bass, and that's for a lot of people why they're buying. This is more of a musical speaker. It's more of an all-rounder. So it doesn't produce that upper bass, but it certainly produces more genuine deep bass. And I found the D9 to sound a bit weird. Does it sound weird at all volumes? Well, around 80% comparison.
You say I make you nervous, a tragedy, I'm a beautiful disaster, a reckoning, you wonder how I got this way. You think I'm someone to be saved, someone to clean up and tame. Oh, some things never change, never change. You think I would look pretty on your arm once you cover up my bruises and battle scars, but it always ends the same. Can't bear the things I've had to face, got you crying on your knees in pain. Oh, some things never change, never change. You'll break your back to make me feel again, suffocate to make me breathe again, lose your mind from endless pain. I stopped asking for forgiveness, cause you should know only fools tread with the angels. Fear to go, but you keep trying to get too close. Save myself by turning into stone.
Beat us, you made us stop, now you're late for the border. It's cause it's taking you 20 minutes to order. So when he's making you cry, here's my shoulder. You know you treat it like shit, so I told her girl, you know he's better now. If he's mad, don't matter now. Now it's better to help him cause of you, you're welcome. Now it's mad at you, so dumb. Now you're through, you're welcome. Girl, I don't mean to be stealing, but I can't help myself. You know I got all these feelings and I can't check myself. Wait, treating you, that shit was madness. And now you're with me every day, that shit is magic. Whoa. And every time I can see you lying on Instagram, but every day I'll be showing you, girl, just who I am. Now I got a picture of the sad boy, cause he be crying over what he could've had, boy. Girl, you know he's better now. If he's mad, don't matter now. Now it's better to help him cause of you, you're welcome. Now he's mad at you, so dumb. Now you're through, you're welcome.
Motion Boom, W King D8. Noticeable here is this dip between two peaks that you get at these volumes with the D8, 75 hertz, big dip right down to just below 60 hertz. And then you get another peak, 50 hertz, compared to the Motion Boom. It's a more consistent bass. That peak there is exactly where there's a dip. So there's going to be a huge difference in how these speakers sound. Even though there is some deep bass, because there's this huge gap here, going to sound so much more deep on the Motion Boom. So when you measure this peak 45 hertz, it's like almost nothing in it. But the reality is, Motion Boom, full of bass, 4 dB up at 65 hertz. They're about the same at 85 hertz. Upper bass, 4 dB up for the W King D8. Motion Boom, W King D9. Noticeable now on the W King D9 is this weird bass. Look at the nice linear slant of the Motion Boom. Look at that 80 hertz peak, and then we get another nice lower deep bass peak. But it's all flat on the W King D9. Bit of a peak there at 85 hertz, and this really big upper bass peak, 200 hertz, relative to the rest of the lower bass. Bit of another peak there at 9 kilohertz. Does extend all the way out to 20 kilohertz. Bit more rolled off on the Motion Boom, but so much more deep bass on the Motion Boom compared to a speaker rated twice as much in terms of watts. So much potential, but very strange tuning. W King D8 is pretty bass heavy at the low volumes. Once you start hitting these higher volumes, it does come into its own. And now, I would say at 80% around these volumes, there isn't that much between them. Obviously, the Motion Boom has a more satisfying and a bigger, deeper, more rounded, deep bass, producing more of a rumble than you're going to get on the D8. But, you know, there's bass there, and it's more upper bass heavy on the W King D8. So I would say it's actually quite close. It's going to depend on your taste. I wouldn't knock the W King D8 at these particular volumes. I would say it's actually quite close, and I can see some people preferring the W King D8 these volumes, some people preferring the Motion Boom. As I say, it is more musical. I do find that a little bit compressed sounding, what I would call non-musical, and this is going to suit someone more into listening to the actual track itself, rather than it's outside, it's by the pool, and it's just the beat and the general sound that you're really getting. Then probably the W King D8 is more your guy. But that W King D9, I've got to say, well, I find I don't like the tuning at all. It does have an upper bass thump. It clearly is a bass heavy, what you would call, even though it's upper bass rather than deep bass. And in terms of deep bass, when you are A-Bing it, that's when you're really going to notice. When you A-B it with the Motion Boom, it's almost complete lack. An amazing lack of deep bass at these matched volumes. So if you're doing it by ear and you're just turning up your device to hear a volume you want, these would sound the same. And when there are matched volumes, it's almost like the deep bass is being cut off. You're getting that, still that echoey, hollow kind of nature to the sound. It just sounds non-musical, but as I said, some people are going to find that fine, and I'm hearing from people who find it fine. I don't particularly like it. As my taste and my personal opinion, certainly non-musical. It's anyone who's interested in hearing any accuracy. I don't think they're going to. I'm not saying either of them are the most accurate, but you're going to hear more detail in the Motion Boom. You're going to miss a lot of detail in this weirdly tuned W King D9. I will stress these are default modes for all of them, because the EQ modes, well, obviously it's not default mode on the Motion Boom. Ow, I know that. I told you it's my custom mode. But you get an EQ mode on both the W Kings, which is really more a bass light tuning, and it's slanted to the high end, and it's about going louder. So I will do that in the maximum volume test. But I've done these comparisons against default because they are the best sounding modes on these two speakers until you want to go as you know, even louder than the default volumes will allow. So anything I can add to that is, I said it's poor, and particularly poor on vocals. I find no detail, no life. It doesn't. There's no sense of, to me, that somebody singing. That's a sound coming out of a box to me. Okay, so what do they do? If, for me, they're not beating the Motion Boom. I know they're all priced the same, so it's not like, oh, wow, the Motion Boom is beating a speaker that's the same price. But hey, it is smaller and more musical and still giving more deep bass. But ultimately, 30 watts, 50 watts, 60 watts, what's happening at maximum volume? And by the way, I'm going to throw in a mystery speaker just for a bit more reference in this test.
Trapped in this cycle, all this happens every time. I still wake up each morning waiting for the sun to shine. Waiting for the sun to shine. Now I question everything. You always gave me something to believe in. Like I'm left waiting for an answer. I'm stuck searching, I'm here waiting. Maybe we weren't meant to be. I was always trying to find a reason for me to keep everything together. I'm searching and waiting. Trapped in the cycle, all this happens every time. I still wake up each morning waiting for the sun to shine. Another lonely morning, another hopeless night. I still wake up each morning waiting for the sun to shine. Should have done this differently. Should have seen this coming so clearly. Would have given everything to make this right. I'm left behind here waiting. Should have done this differently. Should have done this differently. Should have done this differently. I'm still searching, I'm here waiting. After this cycle, all this happens every time. Trapped in this cycle, all this happens every time. I still wake up each morning waiting. Trapped in this cycle, all this happens every time. I still wake up each morning waiting. Trapped in this cycle, all this happens every time. I still wake up each morning waiting. Trapped
So the W King D9 EQ mode is indeed the loudest, followed by D8 in its EQ mode, but these are bass light modes, slanted towards the mids and the highs. Then we have the W King D9 in default mode. So EQ mode, default mode. Look how much you're pushing the mids and the highs compared to the default mode. So the default mode will not only sound more bass heavy, it is more bass heavy, minus 37 for the low deep bass, minus 40 for EQ mode. Followed by the JBL Extreme 3. It's a narrow 50 hertz peak. Again, it's going to be mids, lower mids, heavy. It does sound a bit screechy. It does extend all the way out to 20 kilohertz, but way too much bass reduction compared to the mids and the highs. Then we have the Motion Boom in custom mode. Minus 38 is actually the same deep bass as you get on the JBL Extreme 3, but we've got more mid and upper bass on the Motion Boom, so a fuller bass and easier listen. W King D8 is actually a little bit quieter in actual perceived terms, nearly a decibel behind the Boom in custom mode. Indeed, a decibel and a half in actual measured peaks in terms of short-term max, which is over the loudest 3 seconds. The D8 has a bit more upper bass, but the custom mode on Motion Boom has a deeper bass. And in default mode is the Motion Boom quietest of the bunch by a decibel and a half behind the custom mode. So the mystery speaker was, of course, the JBL very extremely overpriced 3. I think it was embarrassing, quite honestly. At £280 for an SBC codec speaker, to hear it against these £70, £80 or even cheaper budget boomboxes, because you don't get any more bass out of it once you've hit 80% volume. There's no hidden EQ mode. I know you keep talking about the low frequency mode. Please don't get me started. There's no intended secret EQ mode. There's no other modes on here. You don't even get EQ tuning in the app. Oh my God, JBL, how is this possible? 2021. So you can plug it in and you will go a bit louder, you will get a little bit more bass, but come on, it's a portable Bluetooth speaker. Clue is in the name, portable Bluetooth speaker. So I'm only doing that on battery for now. I say completely embarrassed. Of course, there is a bass there, but I think it's being outshone here. And the problem, it has no more bass after 80% volume, but it does push up the mids and the highs, and it becomes very screechy and quite a hard listen, I think, for most of us, if you're actually going to push to maximum volumes. In terms of speakers that still sound okay, well, amazingly, the Motion Boom retains the most deep bass. At minus 36 on average for 65 hertz and under. That's more than any of these speakers. Okay, so the W King, in their EQ modes, the W Kings both go louder, and the 60 watt W King D9 EQ mode is the loudest of them all, and noticeably louder. But the thing is, they're doing that by cutting the bass, and no longer for me a reasonable listen. So for me, it's about the default modes, because I don't think they're very nice to listen to in EQ mode. They will simply go louder, and if it's simply about sticking it next to your neighbour and saying, listen to that, and watching them wince because their ears are starting to bleed, okay, that mode will do it for you. But in terms of listenable, to me, doesn't really work. It's default modes. In terms of default modes, minus 36, minus 37, just behind the W King D9. So it does go louder, but actual bass, and don't forget there's more headroom on that app. Go into the app. I know you're going to say, you can EQ all of them, and I've already explained that multiple times. I'm only doing the EQ where you can embed it conveniently, nicely into the speaker. The headroom's there, and it's not completely exploding because you've pushed all the sliders. And in terms of that, there's even more headroom for you guys to mess about with. Clearly, this has incredible, genuine musical deep bass, rather than just a noisy bang. And that's why it's my pound for pound a new world champion. In terms of how much bass do you get in all, so if we average out all the bass, the upper bass and the mid bass and the deep bass, only in its default tuning mode is the Motion Boom out of it. Then the W King D9 is well ahead because you've included the upper bass. But you've got to like that amount of bass. And don't forget, yeah, that's great, but it sounds weird anyway. It doesn't sound right to me, and so even though it goes loud and holds the most bass overall, to me, it's not that listenable. It doesn't sound very good. And then it's very close. Other than default mode on here, even with the Extreme 3, outside of the clear winner, W King D9, the other three in default mode, custom mode. In terms of total bass, it's very close. Still has the most deep bass on the Motion Boom, and there you have it. So for me, it's another win for the Motion Boom. Ultimately, if you want a speaker that goes louder, these two will go louder, but it depends. There's loud and there's how it sounds. So you've got to like how it sounds. In terms of deep bass, it's a clear winner anyway. But in terms of overall bass, the W King D9 does produce it, but it doesn't sound very musical. This sounds the most musical. So I think if you take all the criteria that you would possibly want, given that they are around the same price and it's smaller. And by the way, you can't remove that handle, but apparently you I hadn't tried yet actually. Someone said take the cover off from here, and you'll find you can actually remove that handle. Something to bear in mind. Motion Boom versus W King D9, D8, and the JBL Extremely Priced 3. It's a win for the Motion Boom, except for ultimate ear-piercing loudness. Hope you got something out of my comparison, and I thank you again for watching.